Okay, just a little background for everyone. We have a very significant implementation of Agile EAMP products here at New York DOT. We have our Bridge Data Information System. That system retired about 18 individual applications we had here at DOT that's been in production for at least 3 years now. That's our bridge inventory and inspection, vulnerability analysis, load rating, flagging, inspection scheduling, all of that brought into one application. Our pavement management system, which is also live, that does our pavement needs modeling, and it's also what we used to integrate the Agile application with Esri Roads and Highways. Structures management, which does our bridge needs modeling, as well as it is where the secondary structural assets reside. I'm going to get into that in a little more detail. Portfolio analyst, or asset trade-off analysis, as it used to be called. That will be implemented in the Rudy upgrade, which is happening in the next few months. And we're replacing our roadway inventory and our maintenance management system. And we're going to implement Summit. That'll all be done within the next year. So primary versus secondary assets. We spent a lot of time focused on primary assets. You see that we already have our bridge management and our pavement management modules in place. What are primary assets? For us, primary assets are pavements and bridges, and trade-off analysis that may also include safety and mobility, maybe some other things. Those are the assets that really drive your capital program portfolio. We are balancing, how much money should we spend on bridges, how much should we spend on pavements. We write our program update instructions around those. We know how these deteriorate empirically over time. We've developed complex decision trees for both assets. They are also time-based in terms of how we determine not just what treatments we do, when we do them. We tend to try to do them in the latter third of the window of opportunity for treating those. And we have very detailed inspection programs for both bridges and pavements. That really drives a lot of the program. Secondary assets, on the other hand, they really have gone along for the ride when it comes to how we manage assets and resources in the program. Guide rails, signs, drainage structures, signals, walls. These are all significant assets. But in the old model, the way Federal Highway has had us do projects, we have done what is considered to be a classical sub-optimization. We take, from point A to point B on a section of highway. We used to take everything and basically make it new. So we would do an intense investment in a short section of the system. As resources have become more scarce, we weren't paying attention to the rest of the system. So we really have moved towards more of a maintenance and preservation type strategy. I think a lot of states have done that. As W. Edwards Deming says, you can never optimize a system by sub-optimizing the components of that system. So we have moved more towards an optimal approach where we are really trying to treat the assets, just the assets that need to be treated, focus more on simple, cost-effective preservation types of strategies. And it really starts to beg the question that where the secondary assets were always included in our major capital work, now if we're just doing simple maintenance paving projects, element level projects on bridges, really what should we be doing with secondary assets? Should secondary assets be part of an overall trade-off analysis scenario? But we are beginning to tackle some of that, really starting by just trying to get a handle on the inventory and inspection of these things. We are starting to do simple inspections. They're typically pass-fail. We're using more functional or non-functional, not functioning as originally designed. And I've seen folks in Utah who use like a good, fair, poor rating scale for these secondary assets when they're inspected. And like major assets, we always include major defects on the bridges, major defects on pavements. With the new national bridge elements, defect is a significant part of that inspection. And we have always used particular, primary pavement defect, alligator cracking, corner cracking, those kinds of things. On the pavement side. We're now trying to decide whether we need to include primary defects in how we score secondary assets.
And on this slide, just to continue discussion about secondary assets, I would like to add that currently in New York State, there is no unified approach, no models exist, how to collect data, how to organize them. Some subject experts in some regions created own databases, but the data doesn't talk in between. So there's a gaps where we don't have any data, or we have maybe even a little bit more data, but only for one region. So how we can approach our new system and design it so it will be similar, easy to use. One interesting fact about New York State, we have rusty guide rails, and to replace these rusty guide rails in New York State, we need $16 million.
So Lubov mentions the rustic rail issue that we have. That is something that we're now just trying to tackle as part of our program update process. Do we take major secondary asset issues and just take those off the top as part of the capital program and address those, or do they end up being part of the allocations that we give to the regions? There are a number of issues around secondary assets. I mentioned how do we program them? Do we do element-specific types of contracts, countywide contracts for culverts or guide rail, those kinds of things? Those of you who have done pavement modeling understand that they do have an impact on your pavement modeling costs. You know, every time we get money for paving, one of the first questions is, do we include secondary assets? Do we include the rail? Do we include signs? Do we include drainage as part of the cost? Because including those things can drive the cost of a simple pavement project up by 15 or 20%. Also, there's a requirement to do safety appurtenances. So how do we tackle safety appurtenances? Do we include them as part of the simple pavement projects, or do we follow up, which is really what we've been doing more of in the last few years, is we do the paving project and we inform the feds that we will come back later and upgrade the signs and the rail and those kinds of things. But also has this, the secondary assets affect the pavement modeling costs. They therefore also have an effect on trade-off analysis, because now if we are inflating the pavement costs because they also include secondary assets, that warps the trade-off analysis as well. We need, and we're going to get into this more, inventory and condition. What we've been trying to do with our Agile EAMP implementation is we've taken the word enterprise very seriously. What does it mean to have an enterprise system? Our goal is not to have an enterprise system which is a patchwork of modules, and within those modules, a patchwork of assets where individual asset teams of subject matter experts sit down in design sessions and develop screens and approaches and navigation in their own individual way, so that if you're in the guide rail module and then you go to a sign module, it looks, feels, acts differently. We really are trying to get to an enterprise system that looks like it was designed with one mind, one overall approach to how we're going to, what the look and feel and data structures and so on are going to work within these. So we want that consistency. Gathering the data, that is something that we have struggled for years and years, and we've really not collected inventory and condition on secondary assets until recently because we really had no good cost-effective way of doing that. There are very cost-effective ways of doing that now. We're going to get into that. Another issue is, you collect this data, but how do you keep it current? How good's your asset management data if it is 2 or 3 years old? That's another thing we'll tackle. And then the role of maintenance and capital. For us here at DOT, there are really two different sides of the coin. The way capital thinks about programming projects and setting priorities is very different than we do with maintenance, who tends these days to be very reactive. And we're just starting to get our heads around how are we going to treat these secondary assets? Is maintenance going to have a complementary role? Is maintenance going to have a role of just dealing with defects, accidents, just the damaged section of guide rail from a hit where the whole section of guide rail, if it's going to be replaced, is done by capital? We need to build some of those rules in on who does what with these secondary assets, depending on what's driving the condition. Secondary assets in EAMP. We'll talk about inventory and condition, automated data collection, the mobile data collection, and maintenance and construction updates. There's really 3 C's: the collection, completeness, and currency of data. It's critical for the usefulness of the secondary asset information, and we'll address these in the next few slides.
So just to continue what Steve just mentioned, we were working constantly with our subject experts or asset managers from regions and our main office here to lay out what's the workflow to define critical data for secondary assets. Then we're constantly working with AgileAssets to design the data structure and screens for our assets. This screen showing mock-up screen from one of the design documents where, together with AgileAssets, we come up with design of several tabs on a top. So right here we see on the right side, on the left side we see inventory items, and on the right side details. This screen is one of the existing structure management for retaining walls. Common navigation between different assets and inventory and inspection screens make it easier to use for user and user-friendly. Tabular system gives us ability to add necessary, unique for specific asset tab with some aspects. For example, for retaining walls, this screen shows addition of wall geometry, which other assets may not have.
I just want to jump in here too. What you'll notice here is the basic design structure that we're trying to do for all our secondary assets. You'll see the gutter on the left side that has the overall inventory. That's common. You've probably all seen that in other modules in Agile. We've developed this tab structure that's primarily like every secondary asset will have a tab for inventory, one for inspection, one for photo images, and one that is typically for sketches or for like retaining walls. We have wall geometry and some things like that that are unique to retaining walls that we thought were important to have that. But they all navigate the same way. They all have the same structure, so that if you go from signs to rail to walls, the way you navigate these, the way they look, is all going to be the same.
That's just another example of inspection screen.
Okay, so how are we collecting this? This is probably not anything particularly new to many of you, but it is new to us. A big part of this is figuring out how we were going to capture this data. What we're doing is we're working with, we've worked with Fugro the last 3 years. We started with a 2-year pilot. In that pilot, we went to one county and collected the secondary asset data for Broome County in our southern tier. Second year, we extended it to Region 9, which is the region that Broome County is in. And this third year, which is this year, we are collecting this statewide. What Fugro does is they put an additional side view camera on their van that allows them to capture any secondary asset that you can see. And we work with them to put criteria together for inspections and defects that are associated with these things. You have to excuse me. Our light just went out.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. So we're having them collect that information using the van. The incremental cost, we all have to collect pavement condition data. For us, that's about $2 million a year. The increment is less than $1 million, closer to $500,000 to collect and process all of the secondary asset information. So the increment is very small. We started with Fugro because when we got into this, the cost between photo imagery and LiDAR was significantly different. The unit costs were about 4 to 1 at the time, LiDAR to photo imagery. And I'm a big believer in crawl, walk, run. So we wanted to start relatively simply and relatively inexpensively. What has happened, some of you might have heard that Manly now is working with TomTom, because TomTom is collecting all of this data for automated smart vehicle technology. And they are selling their LiDAR data to as sort of aftermarket to Manly customers, so that all we're really paying for with Manly is the processing cost. That has really brought that 4 to 1 ratio down to 1.5 to 1. So it is getting a lot more cost effective to use LiDAR. So we're going to have a pilot in Chemung County in our southern tier this year to do a LiDAR data collection and see how that compares. I want to see how the structure that their data comes in. Manly has some really nice visualization tools. They've got some really nice automated measurement tools, because you literally have millions of points of light, all of which have X, Y, Z coordinates. So by having that, you can actually go, and if you're looking at a section of highway, you can actually go and do on-screen measurements for the dimensions of various assets that you can see in those images. So there's some very attractive things with LiDAR. LiDAR is becoming more affordable to most of us, but we've worked with Fugro for years, and they've always served us well. So we're continuing with them for now, but also looking at LiDAR for the future. On top of that, we are also doing mobile data collection for secondary assets. The Fugro contract, we're going to collect these secondary assets on a 4-year cycle. Complex assets require more computing power, For these more complex assets, we're putting them in our structures management module. So retaining walls, noise walls, signals, overhead sign structures that have complex workflows, that have a separation of data collection, quality control, quality assurance, because of the staged editing requirements in those need to be in an FDC solution, or as the inspection tool becomes available from Agile in that tool. So we've separated those. We've put the structural assets in the structures management module and put the simple assets, guide rails, signs, drainage structures, that don't have complex workflows. We're either just collecting the data and committing it immediately, or you can have a simple check off that someone has reviewed it and committed the data. We are putting all of that in our maintenance management module. These all have simple workflows. These have tablet solutions which work well with where we're going with maintenance management. Because in maintenance management, part of the MMS implementation is we're implementing mobile work manager. So we're going to be buying tablet computers for our workforce. And you can put Esri Collector and Survey 123 onto those tablets. So we don't have to buy redundant devices. We can use the same device. The idea is to use Esri Collector for inventory, because Esri Collector is a map-based tool. So it's ideal for collecting your inventory. And Survey 123 for inspection, because Survey 123 is a form-based solution. So they are very good complements to the mobile work manager solution, and I'll talk a little bit more about how it complements that when doing maintenance work in particular. So yeah, we're doing this data collection, but since we're doing it on a 4-year cycle, the question is, what happens in between? What happens when a maintenance crew goes out there and puts an extension on a culvert pipe? What happens when you have a construction contract and you retire all the assets for a segment of highway? How do you maintain the currency of that data? So with maintenance, I'll start with construction, because construction is relatively simple. Mary Susan Knaus in our office did a pilot. She's a real pioneer for us in asset management, and she's from our Hudson Valley area. She developed a special note that she puts in all the Region 8 construction contracts, that the contractor at the end of the project needs to provide a shape file with updated asset inventory, which she uses then to update the secondary asset inventories that she maintains in her region. So that is an easy way we are either going to put a pay item or a special note in all our construction contracts to be able to get this information, so that as the assets are retired and renewed, that will be reflected in the system. Maintenance, and to be perfectly honest with you all, we are still sorting out how we're going to do this in maintenance. We have the mobile devices that I mentioned earlier with Mobile Work Manager and the Esri tools on them. So we have the ability within the device to do both the daily work reporting that our folks need to do, the day cards and work orders and those kind of things. But on the same device, they'll be able to access the inventory and inspection tools. Our thought at this point is to have activity-based triggers, So if you have an activity which is called, replace a culvert or replace guide rail, that would trigger a process that originally we thought what we would do is have the folks in the field on that device automatically be triggered to go and update the inventory and inspection. After we thought about that for a while, we're a little concerned because, these are maintenance supervisors. They may not be the best folks to do these inventory and update and condition updates. So our current thought is to have these trigger a process that will cause the resident engineer, the engineer for that county, to be informed that these activities occurred, where they occurred, and that they need to update their inventory and conditions. So they will get a reminder that they need to do that. So that's kind of our current thinking, but honestly, we are still working through that process. A holy grail of being able to do an enterprise solution. Those of you that know what Stan Burns did out at Utah DOT, Stan took all these disparate secondary assets that were in these individual applications and went through a major data integration project, data warehousing, data integration process. Utah was way ahead of their time, like they often are, with seeing these things and developing them. And Stan worked with John Guyman of New Metric to develop a tool which I fell in love with when I saw it at the last IUC. Many of you might have seen this at the last IUC, where because now you have your pavement inventory, your pavement conditions, you have your secondary asset inventory and conditions. They're all on a common GIS platform, common linear referencing system. You can now go and do what I think Stan calls his simple paving projects in 15 minutes. Because now if you take the information that you have in your asset management system, combine it with the unit costs that you have from your construction system, you can then go and say, okay, I want to mill a certain amount off the surface of the pavement. Because you have your roadway inventory, you know the dimension of that pavement, you know the widths, you know where the widths vary. So you can calculate then quantity of material to be removed. You can determine that you're going to put an 1.5 inch overlay on there, maybe with some tack coat. Again, you have the dimensions. You can automatically calculate what those quantities are and develop an estimate for those. And now, if you have your secondary asset inventory, if you want to go and replace your signs and rail, or you just want to replace the signs and rail or drainage structures that are in a non-functional or poor condition, you can just select those and include those in your project. The tool that we are implementing with our roadway inventory system is Transcend Straight Line Road Analyzer. So we are now working with Agile and Transcend to come up with a scope of work to use that Straight Line Road Analyzer as the platform for developing these simple pavement projects, which really drive the vast majority of the paving in the state. Most of the paving we do are these simple pavement projects. We are very preservation oriented, so this is a tool that we think could get a lot of use. So we're looking at that, and with Jasper reports, my thought is we can actually we can do the estimates, we can locate the work, And we can actually produce the contract documents through the use of Jasper reports. So we have, the beauty of having an overall enterprise approach. The difference between what we're doing and what Stan did in Utah is that Stan did this through a data integration project on the back end, and we are developing modules with all this information available at the front end in the way we are designing the screen. So it is very similar to what Stan did, but we are designing both the front end and the back end with this. Here's an example of looking at signs in particular. I can't do justice to the presentation that John and Stan did when they were at IUC. So this is an example of, now you can see the section of road. You can identify, you can click on the left any of the signs that you want to replace. If you want to replace all the signs that are in poor condition or poor and fair condition, it will identify those, where they are located. It'll have the MUTCD definitions, so you will know what the size of the sign is. When you're doing these simple projects, you are really replacing in kind. So, you are locating the sign, you're replacing the sign where it is, replacing the pavement where it is. So it is pretty straightforward, and when you have all of this in your database, it's all available right there for you to be able to do your design project. Here's a version that we are just beginning to get our hands around. It is very similar to what Stan and John did, but the idea here is to take advantage of the fact that we are doing the straight line road analyzer here and doing a very similar type of effort using the straight line road analyzer tool. So you see the importance of secondary assets and how it relates to what we're doing with primary assets and doing preservation type of work. But we still have some open questions that we need to answer. How are we going to treat secondary assets? How are we going to treat them in trade-off analysis? Are they additional assets to be traded off? That seems like a significant effort, but we also need to determine if they're handled as assets to be traded off program level or project level. And our portfolio analyst implementation, we are doing program level asset trade-offs. So we are basically optimizing our pavement program, optimizing our bridge program for different budget levels, and essentially creating super scenarios, frontier performance, to determine where those optimum mixes of pavement program and bridge program, but having the pavement and bridge work already optimized in their individual modules. We're also looking at how to do this in terms of project level trade-off, where basically you throw all your potential projects into a hopper with the utility criteria associated with them, and develop your program on a project-by-project basis. So we're still exploring how all of that's going to work. I don't have answers for you. I'm just raising these as questions. We also have some models here in the state where secondary assets are treated as part of staged projects, for lack of a better term. What at least one of our regions has done, because we are doing mostly a maintenance-oriented program, is they will go out the first year that they know they're going to work in an area and do all the drainage work that they need to do. The second year, they will do the paving, and then the third year, they'll come back with the secondary assets. So that seems to really work well in for that region. So that may be an approach that we take going into the future, or some combination of those things. Again, we just sort of, that's me scratching my head trying to figure out where secondary assets fit in with what we're doing with bridge management and pavement management and how all of that will fit into how we analyze our portfolio. So really to sum up, we needed a way of organizing our inventory and condition for secondary assets. We really did not want a hodgepodge of subject matter experts coming up with what may be ideal for their individual asset, but which in the context of an overall enterprise system will confuse your average user. We want what we're doing with Agile. We also have a system of engagement project that we're doing. We're really trying to develop a mindset of we aren't building systems, we aren't building applications for expert users. We are trying to develop this for all users, because when you think about the agency, when you think about what a maintenance engineer needs, what a design engineer needs, what a planner needs, they all need aspects of all of this information that we're collecting on our assets. So we don't want folks to have to go to the safety expert to be able to get their pills and their high accident locations, their incident locations. We want them to be able to make that information readily available. The same with secondary assets. We don't want you to have to be an expert in anything to be able to go and determine, what you have and what condition it's in. So that consistency, that enterprise approach is very important to us. We need to go through, originally we started this project with the ideas like, okay, we're going to, my job is to build the box. My job is to find a place to put all of this data, but not really knowing how to collect and maintain that data. So in a parallel effort, Mike Rossi from my staff, who's done yeoman's work with this, has worked with Fugro and developed this pilot effort on how we're going to collect that data and get an initial inventory that we can at least go and renew every 4 years so that we have at least broad-based secondary asset data. So we have a way of doing that. We've worked on the construction and maintenance piece on how to maintain the currency of that data. Again, a lot of this is new to us. We're still working through some of the issues there. An issue that Lubov and I are working on right now is whenever you build these systems and you're looking across all of your stakeholders, what we may need for maintenance, what we may want to do as an initial implementation may be relatively simple, high-level data. But there's also folks in planning, folks in design that want more detailed information about these assets. So as I mentioned, we're building the box. Right now, the inclination is that we will put these additional data elements in the box. We will make them available, but they aren't all going to get populated. Fugro or Manley, particularly when it comes to condition, is going to be able to fill a piece of this. The rest of it, if we go out and do design projects, or the maintenance folks want to go out and collect the more detailed information, or the environmental folks want to collect more detailed information, we're going to provide the repository for that. But we have no expectation that when we send Fugro or Manley out there to collect this information that all of this data is going to be in there. Again, we still need to determine how this fits in the asset trade-off analysis, particularly how this is going to affect pavement modeling. And lastly, those of you who are slogging through a transportation asset management plan effort, you know that Federal Highway is encouraging states to go beyond the requirements of bridges and pavements, and and encouraging folks to also include plans for their secondary assets to determine the inventory and the value, to explain how you treat these, to be able to set targets for them, and so on. What we're doing here will support that effort. I will also caution you, because if you put these things in your TAMP, then the feds are going to require that you follow up, and they're going to look to see if you are doing the kinds of projects you said you were going to do, that you're achieving the conditions you said you were going to achieve. So I would step cautiously into that dark night of the TAMP. But it will, by having this approach, you will be able to at least have your comprehensive inventory and condition that if asset management planning, as we originally envisioned it, as a way to create transparency across the agency and some transparency with Federal Highway Administration and the public with how we use the resources and apply them to get the optimal outcomes that I think we're all trying to achieve with asset management. That ideal that I certainly went into as a pilot state with the TAMP, if we get back on track with that being the goal of the TAMP as opposed to compliance, that we will have the data to do that. And even if it isn't in the TAMP, we will be able to do that internally and have a more comprehensive approach to how we manage our assets. And with that, we're available for questions. Barry, Patrick?
I'm looking around this. I don't think we have any question here, Steve and Lubov, but maybe just a point of information with the estimating tool we're working to do with you, Steve. It will actually open work orders and update the inventory. It won't just give you an estimate, so it will go behind or beyond just doing the estimate and actually closing the loop once the work is completed.
Oh, that's exciting, Patrick. Once again, you've gone beyond what my initial germ of the vision is, which, that germ of the vision I really stole from Stan. But finding, more refined uses for that. So I think that's great, Patrick. Thank you.
All right, there's no question. Thank you very much, Steve and Lubov.